All right, guys, so the day has finally come. We are no longer simplifying or reducing or rewriting. We are finally solving equations. So what we're looking at this time, though, is we're solving quadratic equations, meaning instead of just something like 3x plus 4 equals 8, we have a quadratic equation, which remember we've been dealing with for a while. So that's like something saying 3x squared plus 4x equals 17. What makes it a quadratic is that x squared right there that we're dealing with. So what we're wanting to find out is what x values could I plug in to make this equation true? And what we usually do is we actually usually write this as 3x squared plus 4x minus 17 equals 0. Because when you would write this as a function, you would actually say y equals 3x squared plus 4x minus 17. And if I'm looking for the solutions to this equation, another way that we phrase that is that we're looking for the zeros of this equation, meaning I'm looking for what numbers do I plug into x so that my y is equal to 0. Okay, what numbers can I plug in for x so that my y is equal to 0? And there's a couple of different ways that we're going to do that. Today we're going to show you how to do that by graphing. I'll show you how to do it by hand and how to do that on a calculator. We're also going to do that by square roots, and we'll do some other methods next time. But to start with, let's solve these equations by graphing, so you can see what it actually looks like if you were solving this equation. So what we're going to do, in fact, go ahead and scribble out this equation because I want to start with numbers that are a little bit nicer. So we're going to actually start with x squared plus 8x, and let's say plus 12 is equal to 0. So that's the function that I want to solve. I want to solve this equation to figure out what my 0 is, okay? And the way that we do this is graph it, okay? We can do that on a calculator, but first, when we do it by hand, we start by graphing the vertex, and remember the x value uses this formula to find my vertex. So whatever's in front of my x is my a, or my x squared is my a, whatever's in front of my x is my b, and whatever's out here all by itself is my c, okay? So all I have to do is plug them in. So negative b is 8, so that's going to go on top. 2 times a, well, a is just 1, so 2 times 1 means negative 8 divided by 2, which just means negative 4. So my vertex, my x value is negative 4, but I need my y value. And if you don't remember how to find your y value, is you plug it in to the equation. So if this is my equation up here, I'm going to plug in a negative 4 to my equation. So I'm going to get negative 4 squared plus 8 multiplied by negative 4 plus 12 equals 0. So let's see what we get. When I plug in, well, we don't know that it equals 0 yet. We want to see what it's going to equal. Negative 4 squared is 16. 8 times a negative 4 is a negative 32, and a positive 12 is positive 12. So 16 minus 32, that's negative 16, plus 12 is going to give me negative 4. So when my x is negative 4, my y value is also negative 4. So my vertex is negative 4, negative 4. So up here on my graph, I go over 1, 2, 3, 4, and down 1, 2, 3, 4. My vertex is going to be right there. Now remember from the last video, we've got to plot a few other points. So I already know that negative 4 is a point on my graph. I want to go to the right and to the left. And let's just go to the right. Let's go to the right 2. So let's go over to negative 2, and let's go to the left to negative 6. And same thing, I plug in my x values to my equation right here, and I see what I get. All right, we're going to ignore that 0 right now. We want to know what makes it equal to 0, but we've got to figure out what my x's get when I plug in a negative 2 and a negative 6. So when I plug in negative 2, I get negative 2 squared plus 8 times negative 2 plus 12. Negative 2 squared is 4. 8 times negative 2 is negative 16. 12 is still 12. So here I get 4 minus 16 is negative 12 plus 12 is 0. So when I plug in a negative 2, I get 0. So over 2 up to 0. Now when I plug in a negative 6 squared plus 8 times negative 6 plus 12 gives me 36 over here. 8 times 6 is, or 8 times negative 6 is negative 48, and then a plus 12, which again, when I add all that together, I end up with another 0. So if I go over to negative 6 to 0, this is what my graph is going to look like. Something like this, okay? And all that smooth. Oh, wow, that wasn't even close. Let's try that one again, should we? We're going to pretend that that is a well-graphed, great straight line right there. So now that I've got my 2 points, I have a couple of options. The numbers that we picked kind of helped us out. But remember, my solutions happen. They're also called zeros. They happen when my y is equal to 0. So my solutions happen when my graph crosses my x-axis right here. So my solution is going to happen right there, and my solution is going to happen right there, which I've actually already found on accident. We plugged in negative 2 and negative 6 and found out that's when y equals 0. So my solutions are going to be x equals negative 2 and x equals negative 6. Those are going to be the solutions to my graph, because you're looking for where the parabola crosses the x-axis. That's your solution. Doing this on the calculator, if I were to put in that same equation, x squared plus 8x plus 12, if I were to graph that, this is what my picture looks like. Now, sometimes you can look at the picture and easily see where it crosses the x-axis. Looking at this, it's pretty easy to see that that's at negative 2 and at negative 6. But if it's not that easy to see, I can actually hit second, calculate, and I want to calculate my zeros. Remember, zeros is another word for solution. So I want to calculate my zeros, and I think I accidentally hit the button twice. So let's try this again. So if I go to my graph, second, calculate zeros, the first thing your calculator is going to ask you is to go to the left. Now, the reason it asks this is, look, I actually cross my x-axis in 2 different places. So I'm going to go to the left of my first cross, and then I'm going to go to the right of my first intersection, the first place it crosses. And then it wants me to guess. So I'm going to try and get right there in the middle. And when I hit enter, it tells me my 0 is negative 6 and y is 0. So that point right there, negative 6, 0, that's my solution when x is equal to negative 6. And then I can do the same thing to find this other intersection. I can hit second, calculate. I can choose to calculate a 0. And I can go right over here to the left of that intersection. And then I go to the right of that intersection. It doesn't matter how close I get. And then I guess. And it tells me my other 0 is when x equals 2. Or negative 2, sorry. So those are the same 2 solutions we got when we solved it by hand. Okay. Now, a couple of things. I had mentioned that there can be a different number of solutions. So what it looks like, what we just did, our parabola, because a quadratic equation is in the shape of a parabola, 2 solutions happens when my vertex is down here below the x-axis, and I cross the x-axis in 2 places. That means I'm going to have 1 solution, 2 solutions. Okay. 1 solution, that happens when my vertex sits right on the x-axis. So if my vertex was right there and I only touched the x-axis, I would only have 1 solution. All right. And then no real solutions happens when I don't ever cross. So if my parabola was up here like this, and I never crossed that x-axis, there would be no real solutions because I never crossed that x-axis. Y does not ever equal 0, and so I can't have a solution, okay? So let's try a couple of these. I've got 2 examples here, and let's go ahead and do one of them by hand, just to look at what it looks like, and the other one we'll do on the calculator. So this first one, negative x squared plus 4x plus 5. If I want to graph this, I've got to draw my graph. And the first thing I find is my vertex, which, remember, x equals negative b over 2a. So my x is going to equal negative b, which is the 4, divided by 2 multiplied by a. Well, a is a negative something. It's actually a negative 1 because there's no number there. So this becomes negative 4 over negative 2, which just becomes positive 2. So that means my x is going to cross somewhere right here, or my intercept is going to be somewhere right here. All right. To find the other value for my vertex, I know that my x value is 2, but now I've got to figure out my y value. So I plug in 2 to my equation. So I get negative 2 squared. Now that negative is not inside. Be careful, it's in front of the x squared, plus 4 times 2 plus 5. So that gives me 2 times 2 squared is 4, so negative 4, plus 4 times 2 is 8 plus 5. So my y value is going to be at negative 4 plus 8 is 4 plus 5 is 9. So my y value is going to be 9. So I go over 2 and I go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this right here is my vertex. Now I need to check a number to the right and a number to the left so that I can finish my graph. So going to the left, let's check. I'm at 2. Let's check when x is equal to 0 because that's easy to do. And then to the right, let's check what happens when, whoops, not right there. Let's see what happens when x is 4. Oh my gosh, I'm writing all kinds of wrong things. We're going to check when x is equal to 0 and when x is equal to 4. So when I plug in a 0 up here, I get negative 0 squared plus 4 times 0 plus 5. Well, that goes away, and I'm just left with a 5. So that was really easy. When x is 0, y is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's one of my points. And now when x is 4, so let's plug that in. Negative 4 squared plus 4 times 4 plus 5 gives me negative 16 plus 16 plus 5. Those cancel each other out, and I'm left with 5 again. So when x is 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, y is 5. So my graph is going to look something like this, just with a little bit more smooth change in distance there. So my graph's going to look something like that. Now, here's my problem doing it by hand, and here's why I prefer to use the calculator. When I drew that parabola, I could have drawn that in a lot of different ways. What I'm trying to do is go from here through here, but after that, I don't really know what happens. And depending on how I draw it, I could have all kinds of different answers or guesses. So one option is to pick numbers that go further out and try to get closer down here so I know where I'm going to cross. But I would prefer to do that on the calculator, because if I go to my calculator, y equals, and I just plug in negative x squared plus 4x plus 5, when I graph that, I know exactly what it looks like, and I can see that I'm crossing right here and I'm crossing right here. Now, looking at that, it looks like this left one is negative 1, and it looks like this one is at 5. But sometimes looks can be deceiving. So I'm going to go ahead and do second trace. And I'm going to let the calculator double check for me. I'm going to choose, I want it to find my 0. And so I need to go to the left of my, where I cross the axis, and I need to go to the right. So I'm to the left, I'm to the right, and now I need to guess right where I cross. And as long as I'm close, I should be okay. So it does. It says that I cross when x is equal to -1. So -1, 0. So x equals -1. That's one of my solutions. Now to check my other one, I'm going to do second and hit the trace calculate button, and I'm going to choose zeros again. And as long as I'm to the left, I can even choose clear over here. As long as I'm to the left of my, where I cross, and as long as I'm to the right, it doesn't matter where I pick, and then I'm going to guess right on it. And we were right, it is 5. So my other point is 5, 0, which means that x is equal to 5. So those are my two solutions, -1 and 5. Now, sometimes it asks you to write this answer in roster form. If it asks you to do that in roster form, all that means is you put a bracket and then you put your two x's, -1, 5, and then you put another bracket. Okay, that's what it looks like to answer in roster form. And you may have some questions that ask you to do that on the homework. Okay, so moving on to this next one. We'll just go ahead and do this one on the calculator, but I have a problem. This -26 is on the wrong side. Remember, I want my function set up equal to 0. So I have to move this -26 to the other side. And if I do that just by adding 26, I end up with 2x squared minus 16x. And if I add 26 to both sides, I end up with plus 26 equals 0, since those cancel out. And that's the equation that I'm going to use. So I go up to y equals, and I'm going to put 2x squared minus 16x plus 26, and I'm going to hit graph. And it draws the picture for me right there. I wish my calculator was as fast as the computer does it. So when I look at my picture, I'm looking for where I cross the x-axis. Remember, those are my answers I'm looking for. And if I look at this one, I'm really close to 2, and I'm really close to 3, 4, 5, 6, but I'm not exact. And so I really don't want to guess. So I'm going to let the calculator do the calculating for me. I'm going to hit second, trace calculate, and I'm looking for a 0. I want to know, where does it cross that line? So I need to go to the left and hit enter. And then I need to go to the right and hit enter again. And then I go right on what looks like it's close, and it tells me that's not a very nice number. It tells me that my x is equal to 2.2679492. Yeah, that's not a very pretty number at all. I would have never guessed. I would have guessed like 2.2 or something like that. But that's enough rounding for me. Let's check our other answer. If I do second, calculate again, and go down to 0, this time I want to go to the left of this crossing and to the right of that crossing. And then I'm going to guess right on top of it as close as I can. And again, I get an ugly x. X equals 5.7320508. I would be happy. In fact, if this was a problem on the homework, it would tell you to round to a certain decimal place. Go ahead and do so. You don't have to write out all those decimals. A good rule is to round to 3 decimals. So x equals 2.268 and 5.732. Those would be good rounding numbers right there. All right, so that's one way to solve these equations. The graph is great, especially on the calculator, because it does a lot of the math for you. You just have to remember how to do it. Now, if I have another situation that looks like this, what happens if I don't have an x? Well, we can use something called the square root property. So there's a few notes up here for you. This works when you can isolate the x squared without another variable. So what that means is there is no x term. There's no x term. And if you notice in all of these examples right here, There's a 36x squared, there's a 25x squared, there's a b squared, and technically there's an x right here, but I'm going to show you that one here in just a minute. So when there's no x term, the first step is to add, subtract, multiply, divide to get the squared term by itself. So what I want to get rid of is this 36. I want x squared all by itself. So I'm going to divide by 36 and divide by 36, and I get x squared equals 121 over 36. I'm not going to actually do that division because it's not going to be a very nice number. 121 divided by 36 is going to give me what? Well, not 336. Divided by 36 gives me 3.36111111. Yeah, that's not a nice number. So I'm going to leave it like this. Step 2 is to take the square root of both sides, because I'm trying to figure out what x is. Remember, that's what we're looking for. Our solutions are what x makes this equation true. So to get rid of that squared, my next step is to take the square root of both sides. So when I square root a square, that cancels out and I'm just left with x. Now when I square root this side, we've got to be really careful, something that we haven't dealt with this year. When I take the square root of a number, I actually have two possible answers. For example, if I take the square root of 4, the answer is 2, because 2 times 2 is equal to 4. But that's not the only answer. We could also use -2, because a -2 multiplied by a -2 is also equal to 4. So when I take the square root, I actually get two answers, a positive and a negative. And then the square root of 121 over 36, well, that's just the square root of 121 over the square root of 36, which is the square root of 121 is 11. The square root of 36 is 6. So my answer is x equals a positive 11/6 or a negative, and a negative 11/6. So my answers would be 11 over 6, comma, negative 11 over 6. Those are my two solutions that make this equation true when I use those two numbers. Okay, so now this one on the right, same thing, there's no x. So I want to get x squared by itself. So I'm going to minus 13 minus 13. So I get 100 equals 25x squared. So I divide by 25, divide by 25, and I get 4 is equal to x squared. Now to get rid of that squared, I'm going to square root and I'm going to square root, which means that x is equal to not just 2, but the positive 2 and a negative 2. So I could put x equals 2 and x equals -2, or if I wanted to write it in roster form, I would write it like this. Okay, those are my two values for x. And if you want to double check and plug them in right here, 2 squared, if I change that to a 2, 2 squared is 4, times 25 is 100, plus 13 is 113. So that's a good answer. -2 squared is also 4, times 25 is 100, plus 13 is 113. So those are my two answers. Now, this one looks like there's an x. And I could FOIL this out, and that's one way to solve it. That would work, but because the x is on the inside of these parentheses, before I do anything else, I'm going to just take the square root of these parentheses and the square root of this 49, because I'm going to make that square go away. I'm going to cancel it out, and I end up with x minus 2 is equal to the square root of 49 is 7. But it's not just 7, it's also a -7. So from here, I kind of have to do this problem twice. X minus 2 could equal 7, but x minus 2 could also equal -7. So when I add 2 to both sides, x could equal 9. And when I add 2 on this one, x could equal -5. So those would be my two answers, x equals 9 and x equals -5. Okay, one more and then I'll let you do the practice. 1/4 b squared equals 36. There's no b, there's only a b squared, so I want to get rid of this 1/4. Well, remember, to get rid of 1/4, I need to times by 4, because that'll cancel out, which means I need to times this side by 4. So b squared equals 36 times 4 is 144. And then when I take the square root, b is equal to, the square root of 144 is 12, but it's also -12. So my two answers would be 12 and -12. All right. Well, let's give it a shot. You've got, I think I have 8 or 10 problems on homework part C for you to try. So work on homework 7 part C. Work on that at home. Get as much of it as you can done. If you have questions, bring them to class and we'll answer those for you, and we'll work on 7AB.